So now let's have a brief look at different Ionic UI components. Let's go back to our code to get a bit more understanding about where we can use the UI component and a bit more knowledge about the pages. So let's go inside our tab 1 page, and inside this, let's open HTML page. And here we have an Ionic header and Ionic content. Header is something, some sort of like a head, what we have in HTML page, and content is some sort of like the body. So let's delete all of this, which is pre-written content. And so whatever which we want to display inside our app must go inside this Ionic content, the Ion content element. So let's replace this and let's just write h1, and in this let's write hello world, and let's save this and let's go back to our page or the app. We can see in the tab 1 there is just the hello world. When we go to tab 2 it changes, and when we come back to tab 1 we see this hello world printing. So we know that whatever content which we want to display must come inside this Ionic content element. Now, the next most important thing which comes is we need to know we need to have that power of where the element should be, where the text at or the position where we want to place something in our app. So that comes with the knowledge of grid. Grid, which you might have studied in the CSS, it's something similar to that. So a grid provides a structure to your application. Then with the help of rows and columns, you can break down your application and place any element at a certain position where you want. So let's try to implement an Ionic grid inside this one page. So uh, to make or to generate this Ionic grid, first we need to use this Ion grid HTML element. And inside this grid, we want different rows and different columns. So we will first make one row, and then we'll divide each row into separate columns. And according to that, we can position the element inside that particular row. So let's first create an Ionic row, Ion row. And inside this row, let's create our very first column with the help of Ion column. So this is our first row, and in this, so it's something like this is our first row, and in this first row we have our first column. Inside this first column, let's just say this is the first row. Because there is only one column, we'll copy this entire thing and we'll paste this again, and this is our second row. Let's go back to our application, and we can see because we have not specified the size of the column yet, that's why it's taking the entire space. So whatever text we place is coming in the whole row. So this was the first row, this was the second row. Similarly, if we keep on adding, the text will keep going down as if there are some rows. Now let's try to understand how we can use the columns and how we can change the size of the column to actually position the things and make the grid. So it's quite simple. You just need to add this attribute called size, and then in this size, the number can vary from 1 to 12. So I'll explain you how this number works. So imagine the whole row is divided, it's pre-divided into 12 columns. So this whole row, whatever till the end, is already divided in 12 pieces. Now, if I say the size is just 6, which means this column is of size 6. I have just said that uh, all the columns were pre-divided into size of 12. The total size was the total columns were 12, and we have specified for this column the size is 6. So it will take the first 6 columns and the rest will be left unused. After that, we can again add another column of maybe the same size, and now in the whole 12 columns, the first 6 will be used by this first column, and the next 6 will be used by second column. So let's go back to our application. We can see if the entire thing was divided into 12 columns and the first column is just using the first 6, which means division should be in the middle. That's why we are seeing the first column is in the left and the second column starts from right from the middle because it's using the last 6. So it's starting from middle of the page. Let's delete this and let's try to make different size of columns uh, in different rows. So let's delete this and let's first create a column with a size 12. So because there are totally only 12 columns and we are giving the entire thing to that particular one column, so it will take all the columns and the whole row will be just one column. Similarly, let's delete this. We can have another row. Now the size can be 6, as we just saw. 6 will divide it into only half section. So next column can also be of size 6. We can say the next column is also of size 6 and we are printing the number 6 in middle of that. Let's copy this again. And now let's give only 4 size as equals to 4. So 4, the first column will have 4 columns or the size of 4 columns. Next will again may have the size of 4. This means total 8 columns are being used. Next, if we add 4 more, we'll be having a total of 12 columns, which is the entire row. So this 4 size will take over the whole row now. Similarly, let's also create a size of 3. With 3, we'll need one more column as 3 into 4 is 12. So let's save this and go back to our application. We can see the 12 takes the entire row, although it starts printing from left to right and the rest of the space is not being used. Even then, the next thing, 6 is being printed on the next line because 12 has taken the full row. Next, the 6 is printing in the two different uh, columns and which are actually 50 and 50% of the whole row. This is because we divided the 12 into two parts, and if there are only two parts, they are of equal size, so there will be only 50 and 50%. Then we divided the entire 12 columns into four size of 4. That's why we have column with 1/3 length. So this length is 1/3. Now the length from between this 4 to the last 4 is 1/3. And from this one of this 4 to the last edge is the 1/3 of the size of the whole row. Similarly, when we divided the entire 12 into size of 3, we got 4 equal sizes or the 4 equal columns. What if in the next row if we give sizes differently. Let's say the first column is of size 6, but the next column is of size 3, and the rest of columns are of size 1. We can see 6, 3 is 9, then 10, then 11. We still have one, we can still give one more column. So let's give that 2. Now let's see what the results are. So as we can see, as we gave the size equals to 6, the 6 took up almost the 50% of the whole row. Then the 3 was given the size 3. That's why 3 is taking 1/4 of the entire row. While the size 1 is nothing, but every column they are of the only one size, which means only one column is of length 1. So we are seeing this distance is just minimum, and it's the least distance between the two columns. So this is how the grid works, and this is how we use iron row and iron column. And with the help of this iron row and column overall in the grid, we can actually position elements in whatever fashion we want. So this gives us the power of positioning any element in the whole page in the way we want it to look. So this iron row and the iron column, or we can say the iron grid, are the UI components. These HTML elements are not actually elements in the standard HTML. These are the Ionic framework have generated these HTML elements, and only it can understand. So there are several more of such UI components. We can have a look at them in the documentation provided by Ionic. Let's go to the documentation now. So if we go to ionicframework.com/doc/components, here is the curated list of all the components with the available code if you want to use them directly into your app. So if you look over here, we have different components which are quite easily seen in different apps which we use in our daily life. So for example, we use the grid here. This is also a UI component. We can also use the icons here, like in the name earlier. The square, the ellipse, and the triangle were used. These are nothing but the icons. And just by giving a name, you can use them because Ionic has already installed it for you to use. Well, the most common thing which we see is a list. And this is something which we see in our phone book inside our mobile application app. So when you click onto any component, you can see how the visually the component looks. And here you must select the Angular first, then you can get the code of the displaying component. Let's start with some buttons. You can see there are different kind of buttons, one which can take the full width, one which have the circular edges, dark, and some for danger and some for warning. So let's first click on the Angular to get to the Angular code. And here, let's just select one code, and I'll copy this and I'll come back here in our HTML page right beside this iron grid. I can paste this, and when I go back to our page, I can see the same button being displayed here. When we click on this button, there's a small animation going on. So all of this feature, this UI component, which we can also make by ourselves, it's just that we need to write a lot of CSS and will waste a lot of time and effort on a very minimum thing. But instead of that, we can directly use these components, the ion components, which are the HTML elements, and we can directly use them inside our project. So it will help us to fasten the process of making app, and you can visit the site and you can choose whatever component you want, and the code will be available when you for the Angular part when you click on this Angular tab. Next, let's try the cards in the Ionic. Cards are quite famous. If you can see here, this is something similar to what you see in the Amazon while you're going to purchase something, or you can relate to the card as how you see post in Facebook. So they are just different cards, or you can imagine this as this is what you see when you go to YouTube, and each video is actually inside one card, and that card has the video thumbnail and the title and just a small description maybe about the video. So cards are quite used very frequently in the applications. So let's try to implement this card in one of our tab. If let's just try to use the standard card, and we can use the view source button here. It will take us to the code, and there we can directly copy paste this code. Let's here is the iron card, and I'll just copy it, and I'll place it inside our code. So let's try to place this in our tab 3. So I'll delete this whatever content was inside the iron content, and I'll paste the iron card one. As we know, we don't have any image of name madison.jpg. We can provide the URL of some image here as a source, or if we are not uh, if we want to make it a hard-coded image, we can drop an image inside our project only and can refer to the source from there. We can let's try to do that only. So we first need to know where do we keep our images which we want to use in our app. So these or the image and the data or the media are kept as an assets, and inside uh, this is this asset folder is in parallel location with the app folder, and these assets have a folder called icon, and there is a one shape.svg. We can create a new folder inside this assets folder, and we can name this as images. So we can drop some image inside. Okay, sorry, I made a new file there, which it should have been a new folder. So let's go back to our assets folder and create a new folder and name it images. And inside this images, we will give we can place some image which we want to show in the cards. So I have already copied an image inside this images folder, and now we can refer to this location using this method. We are inside this tab 3 folder. We first need to go above this app folder, which means we need to jump 2 folders above. Then we need to go inside this assets folder and inside that folder then go to images folder, and there we have this card image. So to go two folders above, we use double dot slash, which means go above this folder, then again use this to go above two folders, and now we can go to assets slash images. Inside this images we have this card.jpg. So now I have added different images in our images folder, which is inside the assets. And now I have given the link in the source. And now let's see what's going on in our app. So let's go to our tab 3. And here we can see we have created that card successfully. So this is how we just took a UI component and uh, used it inside our app. Let's try to use the images, another images which are inside the images folder, and make a image view in our tab 2. So let's go to our tab 2 page, and let's open our HTML. I will delete everything which is inside this Ionic content, and then here let's first create a grid using Ion Grid, and then inside this let's create our first row, Ion Row, and inside this let's create our Ionic column. Now let's use the ng-for directive to actually get all the images which are inside our asset folder. So we'll actually be using ng-for in our IAM column. So to use ng-for, we need star, then write ng-for, and this is equals to, here we give JavaScript which says let, we can say image for the image variable of, then here we need to give a property, a list, maybe a list which contains all the name of the images. So image list, and then here we can use this image variable inside a image tag source, and here we can again go back to our asset folder using two dots, then a slash, then assets inside the image folder, then slash. Now we'll be using interpolation, and here we can give this img variable, which will be nothing but the name of the image. Now let's create this image list inside the tab2 page.ts file. Let's create this image list. This is equals to an empty array right now. But let's see what are the image names, so we can just write it here. So we have some images of cat which are named from cat1.jpg to cat5.jpg. Similarly, we have dog1 to dog5.jpg. Let's just use this cat, and we can show the images of cat in that tab. So our first image is cat1.jpg. Similarly, cat2.jpg. We'll copy paste this to create until we have 5. So the third one will be cat3.jpg, then 4, and then 5. So we save this. Now all these images, the img variable will be nothing, just the name of that file. And when we go back to our application, here we can see we have got all these images in the column. Because we have not specified the column size, they all are aligned in one row. If we say the column size is 12, so each image will take the entire row and our all the images will come in the next row. So now if we see, we have all the images of the cat. They are all in a new row. Although we have given only one row, but because each column is of size 12, so it occupies the whole row and the next image goes into a new column. What if we change this size to 6 now? If we see again, so because every column is size 6, so it takes half the row. That's why we have two images in one row. So this is how you can fetch images from the asset folder, and you can use the ng4 directive to actually display the content. Or you can just directly use some URL here instead of saving it in the project only, and can show the images like this. So you can just go through the documentation of the components which are available in the Ionic, and you can choose any one whichever is suitable for the app which you are making. There are different components. You just need to look at the documentation. Now let's go back to our slide. So we learned about the Ionic UI components, and there we got to know that these components allow you to make quickly the beautiful UI components. Ionic comes with the stock with several components including cards, lists, and tabs which we used, and all of this is available on the ionicframework.com/doc/components. That is basically the documentation of all the UI components, and you can just go there and pick up any component you want and use it inside your app.